Hey guys, Mark from GameSpot here, and I'm here today to talk to you about the wonders of PC gaming, or rather how you can cast off the shackles of the closed proprietary systems of the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One and give yourself access to a bigger, cheaper and more eclectic library of games. Now I know what you're thinking. Yeah, sure Mark, PC gaming is great and all, but consoles are way cheaper than a decent gaming PC, STFU dude. Well, that's what we're here today to put to the test. Is it possible to build a gaming PC for the same price as an Xbox One, which costs around $550 when you include US sales tax? And if so, will it run games as well? Or, given that the Xbox One can't even muster a full 1080p 60 for the likes of Titanfall, maybe even run them better? I'm going to be taking on the Xbox One and PS4 with an AMD-based PC, while my esteemed colleague Peter Brown will be doing the same thing with Intel and NVIDIA parts to help you see which will give you the most bang for your buck. Check out the full article on GameSpot to see how his machine turned out, but for now, let's get the show on the road and see what parts I've chosen to go into this potentially console-beating AMD-based PC. One of the main disadvantages of building your own budget PC versus buying a pre-built one is the cost of a Windows license. While big companies like Dell and HP cheaply bundle Windows with their computers, sadly we're stuck with a $100 price tag for the OS. Sure, you could go SteamOS for free, but there just aren't enough games on it right now, which makes the latest and most supported version of Windows, Windows 8.1, the way to go. I got a sweet deal for a legit copy of Windows for $70 via eBay, but use caution with the auction site. There are some dodgy dealers out there. If you're going to build a budget PC, then AMD CPUs are the logical choice, particularly when it comes down to sheer value for money. At first I thought it wise to go for one of AMD's A-series APUs, which combines a CPU and GPU onto a single chip, but they're pricey, and performance isn't as good as when using a dedicated GPU. Instead, I went for AMD's FX6300 Vishra CPU. Based on the piledriver architecture, it still can't quite keep up with the best i5s and i7s of the world, but it's close, and it'll smoke the costlier dual-core i3s thanks to its decent clock speed and 6 cores. For the GPU, I went with AMD's older but still excellent and brilliantly overclockable Radeon HD 7850. In fact, the recently released R7 265 is just a rebranded version of the card with a slight clock speed bump. And with retailers clearing out stock to make way for the 265, you can pick up a 7850 for just over $100 from retailers like Newegg. I overclocked this one to 1050 MHz and memory to 1450 MHz with little effort, putting the GPU squarely in 7873 territory. With the two most important components selected, the rest was easy to pick out based on the amount of cash I had left. For the motherboard, I went with Asus's catchily named M5A78L-M/USB 3 AM3+, which is based on the 760G chipset in a micro ATX form factor. It lacks niceties such as PCI Express 3.0 and SATA 6, but it does feature USB 3 as well as Asus's famed motherboard reliability, making it great value at around $50. Power comes courtesy of an 80+ rated EVGA 500W PSU at $45. Some might consider that overkill, but it gives us headroom for future upgrades and overclocking, and you never skimp on the PSU unless you like the thought of potentially frying your shiny new components. Storage is handled by a 500GB Seagate drive at around $50, which is a fast 7200 RPM model, and that should give us a relatively good amount of storage for games. RAM comes in the form of a stick of Kingston's HyperX XMP Blue series running at 1600 MHz. Budget constraints mean I could only stretch to 4GB at around $40, but if you've got a few extra bucks to plow into your PC, here's where I suggest you spend it and pick up 8GB. To house the components, I went with FRACTAL's Core 100 case. It's a case I've used before on budget PC builds, and at less than $40, it's one of the cheapest micro ATX cases out there, or at least one of the cheapest that doesn't look completely terrible and isn't a total pain to work inside. Plus, it's got some nice airflow features with a 120mm fan in the front, space for a 92mm in the back, a removable side-mounted hard disk tray, and the option to add another 120mm fan to the side of the case. The total cost? Just a smidge over the target at $566.16. Was that extra $16 worth it? Well, let's put this sucker together and find out. So here she is, the finished article. Now, there's not a lot of cable management options in the Core 1000, but cheap doesn't have to mean untidy. By using one of the 5.5-inch drive bays to hide the cables, we can still get something that's relatively clean and that gives us good airflow. But enough of the fluff, let's get Windows on this bad boy and benchmark us some games. Mech-based shooter Titanfall runs on a heavily modified version of Valve's Source engine, which isn't the most demanding of game engines. Despite that, the Xbox One famously only runs the game at 792p, whereas the AMD rig has no trouble running it at its highest settings at 1080p and with 2x multi-sampling anti-aliasing on at a locked 60 frames per second. Battlefield 4 is a much more graphically demanding shooter. On PS4 it runs at 1600x900, whereas the Xbox One runs it at 720p. Using the high settings preset at 1080p with anti-aliasing off, the AMD rig pushes around 72 frames per second on average and still looks the business. Cranking it to ultra with 2x multi-sampling anti-aliasing, we see a noticeable drop in frame rate at 1080p to around 42 frames per second, which makes it still very playable. If you're willing to drop down to the PS4's 1600x900 resolution, you'll get some very slick visuals and an easily locked 60 frames per second. Assassin's Creed 4 is another demanding title, one that the Xbox One only pushes at 900p, while the PS4 manages a full and deliciously sweet 1080p. Both run at only 30 frames per second though. At high settings at 1080p with FXAA on, the AMD rig boasts a frame rate of around 47 frames per second. Interestingly, bumping up to very high with FXAA didn't massively affect the frame rate, dropping it down slightly to 42 frames per second. A locked 30 frames per second at the highest settings is possible then, giving you a better looking experience than on the next-gen consoles. Based on Unreal Engine 3, Thief was never going to present too much of an issue. Like many other games, the Xbox One version is only rendered at 900p, while the PS4 runs at 1080p. With everything turned on to the highest settings with the exception of super sampling anti-aliasing, which remained off, the AMD rig pushed 87 frames per second on average, making a lock 60 absolutely no trouble at all. So there you have it folks. Is it possible to build a gaming PC on a next-gen budget? Absolutely. There are some compromises to be made along the way, and if you can stretch to an extra $100 or so, you'll have a PC that'll keep you gaming for some time. More RAM's the obvious choice. It doesn't cost much to bump it up to 8GB, and the less time the PC has to spend thrashing the hard drive for a swap file, the better. An extra $70 towards an R270 GPU would be a wise decision too. It's good value and overclocks extremely well, putting it firmly in the high-end GPU segment for just a fraction of the cost. There's also the option of an SSD for a more responsive feel, an aftermarket cooler for CPU overclocking, and a nicer looking case, but they're not essential. The fact is though, instead of buying an Xbox One or even a PS4, you can build yourself a great gaming PC that will run games even better than those consoles do currently, and you'll have access to a vast, cheaper library of games via services like Steam, where you'll find AAA releases, indie gems, and free-to-play games like Dota 2 that you simply can't get on a console. And hey, if you really want to, you can hook up a controller, plug it into your TV, and kick back on the sofa in your living room too. That's it from me, but be sure to check out Pete's video to see how he got on with his Intel and NVIDIA based PC, and check out the full article over on GameSpot. See you next time.